Happy Tuesday, everybody. It's May 19th. My name is Amal, and I am here to do a Bitcoin roadmap to 2025 analysis. Today's analysis is going to be something a little different than what you guys are used to, but I wanted to map out exactly how I see price action following for the next several weeks and months and years, all the way to 2025. And I based the 2025 price target, the year target, with the idea in mind that markets typically have about a 4 to 5 year cycle duration. I'm going to show you guys exactly how the current events in our landscape, what we're dealing with in terms of coronavirus, the economic downfall, the unlimited QE in terms of Fed printing, how that will impact Bitcoin for the next several months, and then how that will get Bitcoin's price up or down towards our 2025 year target. So first things first, I want to discuss obviously where we are currently. Okay, so if we look at this price action on a daily time frame, we are currently at 97.63. Okay, if we do a 3-day chart right here, what we can really see is a large big pennant developing here in the price action. And this has been developing from this 2017 top all the way to this low of $3,100 at December 2018. And then we've effectively created meaningful lower highs like that, and even what we're seeing right now, and put in somewhat of a higher low right here at $3,600 in March, when we had that big spill in the equity markets as well as crypto markets. So we know where we are, right? So we're right here around $9,700. We just passed the Bitcoin halving, right? And what we've noticed after that is after the halving, miners themselves still kept selling Bitcoin. Well, why is that, you're probably wondering? It's because there are so many miners that require a lot more money to operate lucrative and efficiently. Well, currently, there are huge mining warehouses that can absorb some of the losses in terms of price action of where Bitcoin is, versus the smaller, inefficient miners who cannot absorb the losses of the supply being cut in half due to the halving, and as well as the price where it is right now. So these miners, who are still a decent part of the ecosystem of mining, are actually selling their Bitcoin. And if you look at this newsbtc.com article, the one thing that we quoted from the article was that there were still miners selling a lot of Bitcoin, miners who can't generate enough revenue to cover energy expenses and still make a profit may need to shut down and find another business model entirely. So what you have right now is miner supply coming into the market, continuously selling. You also have the equity markets, which are coming somewhere close to a top in its own respective rebound. And so BTC itself, because it's been correlated to the equity markets for the last several months, is seeing somewhat of a stalling in price action right in this particular 9,000, high 9,000 area. The other thing that we've noticed in price action is that even on this movement back up, okay, so let's turn off everything. Even on this movement back up from March, this rebound, what we've seen is a decline in volume right there. And then right at the top, you actually see this spike in volume. More often than not, what this denotes is that this movement right here was usually caused with lesser volume, maybe retailers trying to FOMO in and drive the prices up. But remember that retailers can only do so much. It's the institutions, first of all, who are driving the prices up and guiding the price up. But then as they guide the price up, what they're really doing is they have a lot of supply to let go, meaning they have a lot of Bitcoin to effectively dump on the market. And why would smarter players, institutions, or professionals dump down here or down here when they could slowly cascade and sell their position all the way up this movement and then sell a majority of their position up here, right? So this is exactly why you see a volume spike right near the high, because there's bigger players who are trying to get out of the market, and the way they can get out of the market is with retail FOMO, keep the price guided up here, and this is why you see a spike in volume right at the top. So now let's move on from the halving effects to the technicals of where we are currently, okay? So if we look at the larger cycles of where Bitcoin has come from, we could clearly identify maybe a 5-wave Elliott wave structure right there, going up to the top of 20K right there, all right? And this comes from, wave 1 being at the high of May 2011, wave 2 right there, wave 3 right at $1,200. Wave 4 pulls back to about $200, and then wave 5 extended us to about $20,000. After that, what we seem to be in is a B, C correction. Now, there are a couple different ways to look at the current price action. Personally, it could also be drawn that this is a larger wave 3 up top. We're in the middle of a wave 4 correction, which could, again, be multi-year, because if the waves 1, 2s, or 3s are multi-year long movements, of course, I expect wave 4 to be a multi-year long correction. But let's just say wave 5 was the top, and we can identify a pretty clean A, B, and maybe a C coming out as a corrective count. So where does that corrective count get us? Well, so far, if we look at the current cycle, like I've mentioned, because we have a continuous decline in volume right there, as you can see, as price moves up, and then a pretty high spike in volume of sell side right at the top right there. What we've effectively created so far is from the 20,000 all-time high, we put in a low right there, which people thought was a base right here, but then we put in a lower low. Then we put in a lower high right here in June 2019. Then we put in a lower high again in October 2019. And then from here, which was this previous low, we put in a higher low, put in another lower high, because the high of this candle right here was about 10,584 on most exchanges. This high right here around February 2020 was about 10,550. So about $30 to $40 of a lower high. Then we dropped down aggressively in March, put in a lower low as per this swing, but still as per this swing low, it's still a higher low. But nonetheless, we changed structure, right? Because what was supposed to be a low and a higher low continued from this high being another lower high and then another lower low. So the structure has been completely shifted from this potentially being bullish right here, where we could have actually pushed out. What we really did was put in another lower high and another lower low. So where does that lead us? Well, currently at present prices, we're still technically at a lower high. Now, unless price actually breaks up above this key high right here, okay, and that's about 10,440 on BLX, but on most exchanges, that's about $10,600 or 10,584, I would say. Once we blast up through that with convincing volume, then we can start talking about higher targets. Unfortunately, we're not at that stage, and unfortunately, we're quickly running out of time because the equity markets are also being a little bit more exhausted. BTC itself is seeing very excess selling volume coming up right at the top. So to me, this looks like maybe a move that has finished off right here around 10,000. Now, it's very possible that from here, we might even get a head fake up closer to that trend line and then start dumping. Or again, we could just start rolling over from here. Or also, like I said, very slim chances also are there that we could just blast up from here. But the chances are there nonetheless. With the structure, the way it looks right now with this big parallel channel at play, the way I see price action is I see a movement to the downside over the next several months. Now, where are my targets for the next several months? Well, if we turn on the pivots indicator as well as the VWAP century, which effectively takes into account a majority of the price action of the lifespan of the asset, we can see that the VWAP century as well as the S1 on the weekly time frame all line up right around $2,400. $2,400 is a pretty big target if you come to meet that maybe by September, October, or November by the end of 2020. Now again, our target for 2025 is a little bit different, all right? So the roadmap to 2025 will have some road bumps, we'll have some ups and downs in price action, but in my opinion, I personally think, at least for now, for the time being, I think we're going to make our way down to at least $2,400. Now, where is my $1,300 target coming from? Well, let's check that out. Let's go to this chart first. So here is where we put in a high of about $1,200 right on November 2013. Once we put in that high, as you can see, we pretty much retraced and had a bear market for about 2 years or so, had a reaccumulation period in 2015 and 16, and then pushed up all the way to 2017, 20,000 high. But remember that this high right here, the $1,200 high, some exchanges that's $1,300. That's why I have my target here of about $1,300. But let's just say that $1,200 to $1,300 high has largely been untested. As you guys very well know, when it comes to technicals, we like to have key areas of resistance that were broken, just like this one was, be tested as support, and then price could just keep moving on. Unfortunately, on a larger time frame, that has not been done, as you can see. There's a big vacuum of a white space that's pretty much left on the chart. So this is why I state that it is very possible that we make our way down at least to $2,400, in my opinion. And it's also possible that we make our way down to $1,200 or $1,300. Now, there's a couple different ways to look at this from a fundamental standpoint. If we start looking at Bitcoin's lifespan in the form of phases, whether it's the early adopters, which are anywhere between 2010 to about 2012 or 13, these phase one adopters are largely in profit and have no worries about ever being in a loss anytime soon unless Bitcoin comes down to $20 or less. Phase two adopters, or the revolutionaries and builders, I like to call them, are still in significant profit. Whether they even got in at the breakout right above this key resistance of $1,200, they're still sitting at a good 6 to 7x profit. Now the phase three people, which are the traders and the speculators who came into the market when the prices were aggressively high, they got in anywhere between $1,400 or $1,500 up to about $20,000. And remember, a lot of the price action of many people getting into the market was anywhere between 6 to 7,000 all the way to about 20,000. Even people up here around 10 to 13,000 got into the market. And so in large part, these people at present prices are either in profit or they're at slight losses, maybe 10, 20% losses, depending on where they got in, whether it's 20,000 or 13,000, they could be at a 40, 50% loss as well. But in large part, phase one and phase two people are untouched. And now if Bitcoin wanted to weed out a significant amount of the participants, that means that once price comes down to this area, pretty much everyone in phase three is wiped out of the market, because I highly doubt that there's going to be a lot of people who can hold on from 20K high and see it crawl all the way down to about 93% drop to about that $1,200 to $1,300 level. Even people who buy in right now, let's just say at current prices, $9,700 or so, we'll see a drop of about 87, 88%. So you can see the risk appetite for a lot of people is not something that they can swallow, 80 to 90% drops even now. Especially if the economy itself is struggling, they're going to look to liquidate any of their possessions, any of their investments, especially things like Bitcoin if it looks like it's starting to sell off, even below its previous lows of 3,600 or even 3,100. I would probably say this is a very possible scenario, but that doesn't mean it's going to be the death of Bitcoin. I personally think it's something, the opposite of that. In my opinion, once you wipe out everyone from the 2017 onward phase, these traders and speculators, I would probably say you cleanse the entire system and only leave behind phase 2 and phase 1 folks. And even if you bought down here, that means you're probably going to hold on to this thing for a long period of time because the risk to reward upside is so great for Bitcoin if you buy at anywhere between $1,300 or $2,400, like I stated over here. So if we start looking at Bitcoin from the perspective of just a technology that is going through its phases of adoption, which we call the S-curve adoption, right? We can see things like electricity and refrigerators and stoves and color TVs have all gone through these phases of adoption, which we call the S-curve adoption. In my opinion, Bitcoin's current adoption cycle is in its larger lifespan cycle is close to peaking off. But close to peaking off doesn't mean that it's anywhere, in the next few months or maybe even a year or two. I think it's about 10 years away, okay? So if it's 10 years away and we are in 2020, so that puts us at a target of about 2030, right? So at about 2030, we're, at the beginning of the century of 2020. Even if we have a cycle shakeout of, cleansing of these traders and speculators, and we go back to anywhere between $1,300 or $2,400, remember, phase 2 and phase 1 are largely untouched. And that means that we then have a big drop like this. We shake out a lot of people. But then from here, what we have is a very unique cycle going forward. I personally think that once we get out of this deep recession or whatever we want to call it for the next several months or maybe a year or two, because we're dealing with the coronavirus, which is really hampering the global economy and global death toll. As you can see at present day, we're at a 4.9 million infection rate, about 325,000 deaths. And who knows how many more deaths this could be in the next several months or by the end of this year. But at some point, humanity itself is going to maybe figure out a vaccine, maybe figure out a way to deal with coronavirus, and life will move on and the economies will start back up. And so this is where the 4 to 5 year cycles come in. And so also based on that, the S-curve adoption comes in. So if we're looking at this purely from the perspective of maybe we need another cycle cleansing in Bitcoin for another few months, and then after that we go into the real rebuilding of Bitcoin itself, the real rebuilding of holders who are going to hold on to this asset for multiple years or maybe even a decade or two, then I see something kind of like this where maybe we go down further and we go into a reaccumulation period, something like this, maybe for a good year or so, and then we start pushing up and out over the next, several years. And something like that is what I see. And all we really have to do is look at previous cycles, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the bar pattern right here. We're going to effectively clone this area, and we're going to put it exactly where this cycle top is, where we are right now, all right? And then we put that cycle top as well as target, as you can see, all right? So it could be close to what, especially, based on what this bar pattern is saying, it's somewhere close to $1 million. Personally, I think Bitcoin tops at about 100,000 in my opinion, maybe 200,000. $1 million is a bit, too far out into the future for me to even think about. But, you know, realistically for a 2025 target, if I were to sort of lessen this, you know, or actually, let's do this. Let's keep this the same, but let's just put a price target of about, you know, $200,000. That is something that I could get behind. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. That's 20,000. I'm trying to put this towards, where is it? Somewhere up here, I guess. Okay. Oh, actually, I guess I got that wrong. Sorry, I thought this was a million for a second. I couldn't read the fine print over there. But this is actually reasonable, you know? So let's actually just keep this, okay? So about $156,000 if we just cloned the previous cycle to this cycle right now, okay? I think that's fair, right? I think $156,000 is fair price for Bitcoin if we start seeing a large percentage of adoption and we start seeing maybe gold itself roll over to the downside and we see major of those adopters maybe start getting into Bitcoin. I think that's fair. But you could see right here, that cycle comes to an end right near July 2024. That's again just by us doing a cloning of previous 2013 top to this 2017 top, so that little 4-year cycle. All right, give or take a couple months here and there based on how well we deal with coronavirus, how well we patch up and repair our economies across the world. This is what I'm thinking as the cycle top in 2025. So that's the way I'm looking at the road going forward. Now, how is the road going to be paved going forward? Well, I personally think there's going to be still a adaptive mentality for Bitcoin. I think there's going to be people who are always going to be interested because the governments across the world are still dealing with a lot of downfall with their own respective economies, with how they're effectively devaluing their own currencies. They're going out and buying bonds and potentially maybe even buying stocks into the future just to support asset prices. It's going to be a very dangerous cycle, and I don't see it ending well because past territories or kingdoms or empires have not ended well when they did that. Specifically, the Roman Empire, the Weimar Republic, these are just a few, all right? And so whether it's America or the Eurozone or even Japan, for an example, I don't think this is going to end well when it comes to asset prices across the board for equities or even the devaluation of currencies. And personally, I am a believer in Bitcoin, but I still do think Bitcoin still has another decade to prove itself. And if it proves itself in the next decade, especially the first half of the decade, all the way to the 2025 marker, I think it'll be worth a lot. Unfortunately, it's also very possible that it fails during that time over the next few years to prove itself, or something else new comes along, or currencies themselves across the world figure out a way to become a little bit more harder money. Anything could happen. It's very hard to predict that into the future. But Bitcoin by far is one of the most amazing assets and innovative technologies that has ever come across. And I personally do think that it could be successful, but I'm also aware that it could also be worth nothing, especially if there's no real adoption to it. So that brings us to the people who might actually help propel Bitcoin into the future that are backing it right now. Some of the more successful people: Raoul Pal, Tim Draper, Chamath, Mark Cuban, Mark Andreessen, Paul Tudor Jones, Mike Novogratz, everyone pretty much on this list, and many others who are going to be successful over the next several months, several years, might have a hand in making Bitcoin successful. Maybe even people in politics might. So that puts us to the price prediction for 2025. In my opinion, either Bitcoin is going to be greater than $100,000 by 2025, or it's probably going to be less than $1,000. I only see this as two binary ways to look at the price action of Bitcoin. Either it's going to be something great, or it's going to be a failed experiment that will probably be worth $1,000 or maybe even zero. I don't see anything in the middle, to be honest. So this is my roadmap for 2025 for Bitcoin. And the reason why I wanted to make this video is because I hope someday I come back to this video, and I hope you do too, or whoever's watching this in the future. I hope you look at this video and you see this video as something helpful, or who knows, I could be completely wrong and price blasts up straight from here. And in, let's just say, the next few months, we see price of Bitcoin at $20,000 or $40,000 or anything beyond that. But personally, looking at the life cycle of price action, when it comes to bubble prices like Bitcoin, or even bubble assets like the 2000.com bubble, or how the Japanese Nikkei, how it exploded, I don't see why Bitcoin cannot break down from its bubble, come back to these more down-to-earth prices of $1,300 or $2,400, and then start its big move back up for the next few years. This is the way you can decrease volatility and get a lot of these phase 3 people out of the market. When you bore them to death, way down to $1,000 or $1,300, stay in that range for maybe a few months, maybe even a year, and then start breaking out over the next several years. Kind of like Bitcoin did over here. Went from $1,200 all the way to about closer to $150, $200, stayed here for about a year or so, and then started to make its way back up. So this is my analysis, and I'm sticking to it for now until I see price action or something change in the nature of Bitcoin and the nature of the markets. But I hope you guys understand my view of how I look at Bitcoin. I do think it's a fantastic asset. I do think it's going to be something great, but I also am aware that it could be an experiment that over the next several years, with how fast technology grows, it could really be either something really great at $100,000 or even higher due to the network effects or due to the S-curve adoption that I've showed you, or it could be just a failed experiment that goes to $1,000 or zero. So I hope you guys enjoyed this analysis. Please sign up with the Alpha Trades community today. There's a link below for our Discord. There's a link below in the YouTube description video to join our community. But whenever you're watching this, whether it's today, tomorrow, a year from now, or 5 years from now, I hope you guys recall our information that we gave you. I hope you like our view. And till then, take care. All hail Bitcoin. All right? Cheers.